We're getting into like an amp market where everybody's turning into an informed consumer end user. And I mean, with all the possibilities, I feel like there's like a new breed of guitar and amp enthusiasts that are going to be experimenting in this way. And like really it's just pushing the whole art of it forward.
Yeah, I agree. And I was talking with another builder, and he said he truly thinks the future is smaller, boutique, handmade than the mass-produced stuff that comes out of China. Some of it's okay, and I understand if you only have $400 or $500 and you want to buy a used Black Star and it gets kind of where you want to go. But I think there's also people out there that are totally willing to spend $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 on really a good, high quality, killer sounding amp, depending on what they play, what type of music they play. And the same with the guitars too. I mean, there's guys who all I need is a Strat, all I need is a Gibson, but some of these, custom made ones or these, boutique made ones, they're different. And I talked to Clifton and we talked about, you go to these shows and Kurt said the same thing. It's like, how many Strats and Les Pauls can you see? Great guitars, but like, hey, this guy's got something a little different, and that's kind of like where we kind of fit in. Yeah, it's a little different, it's a little more expensive, but I think you're getting what you pay for, definitely.
Okay, how's it going, everybody? Today we have Steve Sloane from Sloan Amplification. Steven does Jose-style hot rodded Marshalls, AV 763 Bassman style amps, and also working on Soldano types of amps. How's it going today, Steven?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Just as usual, lots of caffeine and trying to fit everything in when I can.
Yeah, I understand those days.
Yeah, and we still got the pink bastard from the last Zoom with the Midnight Devils, so don't mind if he's here.
No, he's fine with me. I kind of like him.
So yeah, I mean, Steven is actually like a fellow alumni of the Bruce Agnator amp class. That was wild to hear yesterday.
Yeah. It was about 6 years ago. Actually, it was about 6 years ago to the date almost, because it was coming up on my Facebook when I had pictures taken from 6 years ago that it was the amp learning class only. I didn't build an amp because at that point I already built several, and so it was more of a 2-day, or it was a 2-day teaching class, I'm pretty sure. And just a lot of stuff he went over, and with the camaraderie there with other builders, I learned a lot, and I'm still learning today.
Yeah, I mean, from what I remember, I don't know if he was showing you the boutique kit model, but it was like a 50-watt boutique kit that he made especially for the class. And I think it had a Vox voicing in the tone stack. It had a hot rod Marshall voicing, and then pretty sure it was like a blackface Fender voicing, but 3 different switches for all those different voicings.
Yeah.
It's kind of wild to think of an amp with that many voicings for tone stack options.
Yeah, well, because they're all different. But yeah, that's the way he built it. And I think it was probably the same amp. I had thought at one point he tried selling it or something, but maybe he decided to keep it. But it's a good teaching model. But it also had, I believe he had different power capacitor configurations. And I remember him saying that the one with the 22 microfarads just made too much buzzing and noise, and he said it was unacceptable, and he was able to click it over to more filtering, and just to kind of show you the differences on what the power cap filtering does for the amp.
Power cap filtering, that's a concept Can you explain that concept a little bit more? I've never heard it presented in that definition
Yeah.
before.
Well, either here, the power capacitors or the filter capacitors, same thing.
Sure.
Basically what happens is, I'll try and do the best. I'm not always good at explaining the technical things, as opposed to just going in there and doing it. But after the secondary power transformer wires go to the diodes for the rectification to turn it from AC to DC, it needs to smooth it out because it's DC, but it's very rough DC. So it goes into a series of, well, actually they're hooked up in parallel with I forget what, there's a name for the resistors, but it basically filters out the hum and or they call it the ripple in the power section of the amp. And so if you don't have enough, you're going to get hum and buzz, and you're probably not going to get the best low tones either. I remember I had one where the first one, they call it the reservoir cap, and it's usually, if there's a different size, it's usually the biggest. And it broke, the connection broke, and therefore it was getting all kinds of weird phasing and kind of it just sounded like crap. So that's how I know, what the importance of it, by trying to, go in there live, not just do it conceptually or hear it, but I've seen what happens when you don't have the correct filtering, besides hum.
Absolutely. The way I look at that is you've got A, B, and C filter caps. Everything's stepped up or down by resistors between the three different filter caps.
Mm-hmm. That sounds a way of describing it. The first ones, right off the rectifier is usually right where the center tap for if it's a push-pull amp, the center tap for the output transformer go.
Yeah.
And then the next one, there's a resistor to step down, or actually a choke. Those go to the screen grids of the power resistor, or the power tubes, and then so on. Then the next stage goes to the phase inverter, then and so on. And the next, that's kind of typically how it goes, but not all the time. I was just having a discussion today with another builder, and we were talking about how you really got to get most of it, all the filtering, up front, right off the when you start right at the beginning of that chain of filter caps. And the more filtering, the stiffer the sound. And this Soldano inspired build that I have has a lot of filtering up front to make it as quiet as possible, but also stiff as possible, to where it's probably overdone, but that's the way Mike Soldano did it, and I want to get it pretty accurate to his building specs. That's
interesting. So that filtering in the first stage of the power supply, do you think that's responsible for Soldano's sort of stiff sound a little bit?
Well, I think somewhat. Like any amp, everything goes all together, as one part of it. But yeah, he has a very stiff, very filtered supply up front. But actually, as it gets down to the preamp tubes, they're like, I think on his schematic that I seen, and this is his older design that when they first came out, the ones for the preamp tubes are about 15 microfarads. I actually am using 47 because that's what I usually keep. But it's a pretty stiff sound. I think it is all part of, but with much more going on too. I think a big part of his sound is that the resistor on I think it's the third stage on his amp. It's the cold clipper, they call it. Marshall's is the Marshall JCM 800 is a 10K, but his is a 39K, and I think that's responsible for a lot of the tone that comes out of his amp, to where it's just so rich and big sounding. you in the next stage kind of what a cold clipper does, I don't explain it real well, but it really chokes off a lot of the volume, but it clips real soon and heavy, and that's why I think you get so much distortion out of it. But because it takes some of the voltage down, the final stage boosts it back up to where it makes it loud again, and then it goes into the phase inverter. That's kind of the way it was explained to me. Maybe I'm not explaining it the best way, but
I've actually heard Mike Soldano himself talk about that 39K so
me too.
resistor, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard him describe it that way. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, because I mean, this is my first time I built a Soldano-style amp. I'm more used to building the Marshall style. I'm not a huge fan of the 10K cold clipper because, and perhaps because there's only 3 gain stages in the Marshall, and I just think there's better ways of squeezing out more gain and tone. So what I use on the Marshall type stuff that I mod, I don't use a cold clipper. I use something a lot bigger, or actually it's a smaller resistor, which makes it warmer instead of cold. But there's plenty of gain coming from all the stages because I kind of squeeze more gain out of the first 2 stages.
Did Jose come up with the cold clipper, or was that pre-Jose?
That was Marshall. I'm pretty sure it was Marshall. Actually, if you ever seen the Jose, supposedly it's the original. I don't know the schematic out there. It's so sloppy you can't really read it, but everybody kind of knows what's in there, and they've done their own versions. He's, I think, started doing his on plexis, which don't have the cold clipper. Either the 1959 model or the 1987 model, his don't have the cold. Those models didn't have the cold clipper, but he did modify each stage, and then he put in those clipping diodes.
Yeah, he's got his own special. It's either a clipping diode or I think like 2 master volumes, like that. Those are your 2 choices for a Jose mod, if I remember correctly.
Well, there's so many things out there that are considered the Jose mods. I mean, I have diode clippings on mine, but I might not make mine like the next guy. The diode clippings all similar. He actually, I don't know if he did it or if it was Friedman, but there's 2 transistors you can use, and it kind of does the same thing as the diode clipping. I have those transistors. I haven't used them yet, but so I don't know the difference between using that and a diode to make the clipping. But in his, you could put the master volume before the diode clipping or after. Mine is just after because that's the way mine are laid out. So I'm not sure about the big tone difference or not. But what the clipping does is that it just makes, depending on the voltage of the diodes, it makes it clip a lot earlier in the signal. And on mine, it comes in right after the tone stack, or right where the tone stack is, after what's called the cathode follower, and it makes them clip a lot sooner. And for that matter, when they clip sooner, you're getting more distortion, although it does drop the volume, but usually on all those amps, there's plenty of master volume to make up for it. The way it looks, and there's some good stuff online. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. There's a Facebook group I'm in, but the guy's in Australia, Headfirst Amplification, if you're interested. He has a really good video and he shows on the oscilloscope what it does. So you know how a clean signal is like a wave, and that's a clean signal. And the further apart the wave is, the more voltage it is, which kind of translates to more loudness to the ear. Well, what the clipping diodes do is they'll shrink it down and compress it, but it also squares it off, which does the clipping, which gets you your distorted sound. So then I think mine, that would be fed right into the master volume, which goes right into the phase inverter. So it clips earlier, but it also compresses a little bit, so everything sounds a little more compressed, but it clips earlier. It's to me, I mean, it's not necessarily better, but it's just a different way to shape the tone of the amp. the one thing about diodes and I think transistors, they clip more harshly. And that's why we like tube amps, because they clip softer. But I think with all the other tube harmonics going into it, it doesn't sound solid state when they clip. That's my theory on it. I don't know if that's the exact truth on it or not.
Yeah, it seems like with like a diode clipping scenario that it's, you know, as I was describing your amps, a little bit more hi-fi. It's got more balance to it. It's more predictable than, you know, let's just say a rectifier clipping, you know, where it's really predicated on how that tube's behaving at that moment. It seems like diodes are more predictable, and that's a good thing for certain genres like metal and hard
Yeah,
rock.
if you mean predictable as it will clip at that certain voltage, because that's exactly what these are. I use 12-volt Zener diodes, and so once it hits 12 volts, it clips, and it, you know, the signal squares off, and it won't go any higher into the preamp. If you want more volume, you're going to just turn up the master volume. So yeah, in a sense, you know, Mesa, the Boogie, the rectifiers, dual rectifiers, they actually use a 39K2, and you probably not listen to the same Soldano interview as I did. He kind of copied it off of him, but he gets a different tone. Yeah, he did, and I don't think Mike was too happy about it, but I still think Soldano did it a little bit better. I mean, those are two different amps, even though he kind of used the same, you know, the cold clipper, so to speak. The amp you played at the Ohio Guitar Show, I think part of that, what you like, you say, you're kind of saying it's kind of more hi-fi, describing it, and balanced, is I have, and I always forget how to word it because it has to do with, to me, a lot has to do with the negative feedback loop, that if you're familiar with that, it comes out well, in my case, the 4-ohm jack, and it feeds it back into the phase inverter. So there's a resistor that in that line, that's in that wiring, that feeds it back. The bigger the resistor, the louder or more pronounced it is. And you would think the opposite, you know, you would think a smaller resistor, you know, would give you more signal, but since it's negative feedback, it's in reverse. So I don't know to say, it's like, I don't know if the bigger resistor, and probably one of your viewers will know, the bigger resistor, does it give it more negative feedback or less? But at any rate, I know the bigger resistor, like say on a Marshall JCM, off the 4-ohm tap on the output transformer, uses 100. And so if you cut it in half down to 50, it's not quite as loud. It's not quite, it kind of, they say flattens it out a little bit, and flatter is usually more hi-fi. So that's probably where that part of the tone is coming. That amp, I actually might mod in the next couple of weeks and put a switchable one on there, so you could have both. I did it to my bigger Marshall. That one you were playing was the one with the 2 6V6s in it.
Oh, okay.
And, yeah, and that has a lot of negative, I don't know if it's a lot or a little, but it has a pretty small negative feedback resistor in it, probably half the size of what you would get to get the grittier, grittier Marshall sound. But it's an easy mod. It's just a resistor and a switch. So I'm probably gonna be doing that. The only thing is I get a little OCD, so I have to take the plate off, get a new plate to wire. You know, get a new plate so it says what that switch is. And everybody nowadays is calling them response. Like Friedman has a response knob on his, and it basically dials your negative feedback in. I just want to put it on a switch. So that's probably where you're getting the, yeah, when you had mentioned the hi-fi sound, there's a lot of negative feedback in that, or maybe a little, well, however it goes. I'll have to look that up.
Well, there's two things that I gather from that. Is one, just, you know, just thinking about it, maybe with that higher value resistor, you have more variation possibilities, because when it's fully you know, when it's towards 0 on the knob, you're getting less resistance, but as you push it up to noon or past noon, it's giving, you know, half of that value. So for all intents and purposes, if you use a higher resistor, wherever the wiper is on that resistor, you've got a lot of options for resistance going back into your first gain stage from that 4 ohm tap.
Yeah, if you use a knob on it, if you use a pot, like say if I used a, I was thinking about using a 100-watt pot, but they're not that easy to find. But you could make a pot 100 ohm pot, 100K ohm pot. You would have to throw a resistor on it to make it somewhere like maybe half it, and then you could put that in the negative feedback loop and use it as a variable resistor as a pot. I only have mine on the one I was just telling you about. I have it on a switch, so where I just click it on and off, or what I do is I have 100K, and if it's just 100K running through it, then you get the bigger, bolder sound, less flat. And then if it's wired in parallel, so once I click it on, it's another 100K and 200Ks in parallel, half of it, and it makes it 50. So that's how I have it now. There's a possibility in the future I might put it on a knob, but I like how it's doing it now, and I'm going to start doing that to most of my amps because it makes a very pronounced difference in the tone. But like I said, what you were hearing is one that in the 6v6s, because the output transformers and the tubes have different impedance, that one only had 10K. But if you wanted to get it more like an open Marshall sound, it would be like 25 or 26K would be the size you'd want to put in there.
So are you getting reactance based on the negative feedback being sent from that 4 ohm jack? Like, to me, that sounds like the absolute last stage of the amp that you could be sending negative feedback from. So maybe there's some reactance between, at that point, the secondary of the output transformer and the speaker itself. Are you getting some of that sort of like dynamic from that section with that negative feedback?
Well, what it's doing, it's feeding it back into the area of the phase inverter tube. So it's going all the way from the output back into the phase inverter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. One thing, if you're ever building amps and you're building a push-pull, and I even asked Bruce about this, and there's the two different plate wires that come off the output transformer, and the negative feedback is always one of the last things I hook up when I put the amp on, because if you hook them up the wrong way out of phase, you'll get this motorboat sound. And when you hook up the negative feedback, and what you'll have to do is right away you'll notice it, you just have to flip the wires to the other tubes, or you could do it with the grid wires. You could flip those, and it'll sound right. You'll immediately hear it and say, okay, because it's like there's a 50-50 chance you'll get it wrong. And I think we asked Bruce, and he really didn't know what to do unless you really knew the specific how the transformer person wired it. So it's interesting, though. Yeah. So you get that.
Let's listen to the Soldano and maybe look at some photos real quick. Let me share the screen.
this is, for many years, my amps didn't have names, and now they're starting to get them. I used to just call it the 50 watt, kind of like a Marshall or something, but this is actually inspired by Soldano. What it is, the one we're looking at, that is the one that it's called the Antares, and the naming theme is after stars. A friend of mine came up with that, and we're going to go with it. So the Antares is actually a star, but that is it. There's the filtering, lots of filtering, because a typical Soldano. Actually, in this picture, it is basically the same amount of filtering that a Soldano has, although he uses upright caps on a printed circuit board. But same values and everything. It actually has a little bit more now, because these two 22s, I had changed them now to 47s, and it got it even a little bit quieter and stiffer, as far as I'm concerned. But that's the one you just heard. It's the first one like it I built, and I'm pretty happy with it. I actually had taken it to another builder today, and he's out of Akron, and his name's Curran Murphy from Custom Audio Mutation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
He actually has a ton of amps there that he sells. He sells Soldanos, and he was going to actually let me bring one home to put it side by side, but he just put it up side by side with a Soldano, and I sent you that video. And he's a hell of a player. I'm not much of a player at all, and that's why it was the first time I actually heard a good player playing on it. And that one, it's close. It's really close, and the only difference is he feels it's a little more ice picky or a little more brighter than the typical Soldano, but there's some easy fixes that I could do to it to tame it down a little bit. I don't know if I'll tame it down that much. Some people like that, and it's nothing you can't change with the treble and the presence turned down. Sure. He just had the presence and the treble probably less than half. Which he was getting the tone he liked out of it, but I can make it. What I'd like to do is make it so you don't have to quite dial it down to halfway. So kind of at 12 o'clock, you get the nice medium, not too harsh, not too muffled sounding. But good.
Does that one have a negative feedback? This one? Yeah.
Now Soldano uses a 39K, which is actually a pretty small, which gives it a lot of flattening out, because Soldano is, from what I've read, puts most of his, distortion into the preamp. So most of his gain and distortion, and he doesn't rely too much on power section, which the power section is where the negative feedback is. So his is only a 39K in that area. I could imagine, you could put a bigger one on there to get less flatness there. It's going to get pretty hairy, but it's also going to get pretty loud and feedbacky too, because there's so much gain coming out of that preamp. It's unbelievable.
Where's the 39K in the photo that we're looking at?
Far as the negative feedback resistor.
Yeah.
Do you see my mouse?
No, I don't.
It's over there by under those orange drop caps, so you can't really see it, but it's over by the orange drop caps that are closer to the bottom of the screen.
Oh,
if you look, yeah, that's where on the other side of it, of the tubes, is where the output jacks are.
There we go.
Yeah. See, there's that yellow wire coming off the 4-ohm jack there. It's plugged into the 8-ohm in the middle, but there's the one on the bottom of the screen. If you see that yellow wire coming in, that's the negative feedback wire that comes in, and it goes through the depth control. Then from the depth control, it goes also into the presence control. That's another thing too. The depth, or they call them resonance, tone shapers controls, and the presence, those are not in the preamp. Those are actually in the power amp section, in the negative feedback section. So what the presence does is it takes a capacitor and a pot, and it basically takes or it adds more treble or whatever the presence is to you. I think it's treble, but people say it's like upper mid. It adds that into the circuit and takes it out with the pot. The depth does just the opposite. The depth takes, adds and subtracts bass frequencies, and that's done in the power section. That's why the treble, the bass, and the mid range are done in the preamp section. So I think depending on how much negative, or how little negative feedback is, depends on how much how prominent the depth and presence control are.
So you've got here's the tone stack, and I guess the way that I look at tone stacks is the smallest capacitors would be the treble section, and then the largest or the bass section.
Yeah, actually the mid-range in most of these, this is very similar to a Marshall. It's exactly the same except for what they call the slope resistor. And this one is 47K instead of 33K, which gives it a little bit more of a scoop. But they're both the mid-range and the bass ones are actually the same size in these. And in a Fender, they're different size. In a Fender, like the bass in this one, and most Marshalls, Soldanos, the mid-range and the bass cap are 0.022, and the treble cap is 470 picofarad. In a Fender, the bass is 0.1, and then the mid-range is 0.047, and then the treble is 250 picofarad. So,
and then a Marshall would be like
same as this.
Oh,
except for the slope resistor is a little bit lower, which gives it actually more a little bit more mid-range.
Well, pretty clean design here, that's for sure. You got a little sort of like maybe a Panasonic like little red cap.
Yeah.
Is that the bright cap?
No, that's the cap for the depth control.
Oh.
I did not have a 0.0047 in an orange drop, so I use the Panasonic. And that's another thing too, is some people really like, I used orange drops because I have a bunch of them, and that's actually what Soldano uses. I'm not always convinced that the type of capacitor has a huge impact on the tone. It probably does to some effect, but I can't always tell the difference, because I built a couple of those Marshall, like my bigger 50 watt is called that model is called the and no, this is the Antares. My other model is the Arcturus, and the Arcturus, I have one built with all Panasonics, and I have one built with orange drops, and I really can't tell the difference. And the reason I did that was for comparison. And then, the orange drops are a little expensive, and it's not even so much the expense, they're so big.
Yeah.
They get in the way on the board. And, I'd rather use something small where the board looks neater and it's easier to make mods and to get around on the board. I don't know. I'd probably like that to a fault, where I kind of switch components. I don't think it makes a big difference, but other people do, so they'll think they're not getting consistency. And it seems like I'm endlessly in transition sometimes, switching from this part to now moving to this type of part. Not so much changing the values in the circuit, because that's what's important, but more or less changing. Like, I recently went from metal film to carbon film, and you get a little more hiss, but it's a lot easier to get a good solid brand from Mouser Electronics than to buy off eBay, is where all the small metal film resistors come from. There is a metal film brand that they sell at Mouser, but they're prohibitively expensive to me.
Well, I mean, if you ask me, like for a deep switch or bright switch, Panasonics are pretty damn good. I mean, they basically
I think so.
orange drops, and you've already got plenty of orange drops in your tone stack. So to me,
Yeah.
it's actually a good decision.
Yeah, that one right there is not going to make, and no one's going to hear the difference if I stuck if I put a Panasonic, an orange drop, or a Mallory 150. Those are something else I'm starting to use too, which that might be the compromise to where I'm still getting the boutique quality. And I say that with air quotes because some, I'm not sure it's a big difference, but they're not quite as big, but they're also very reputable. Supposedly those might be a little smoother. Yeah, there's a good compare. Those are the exact same amp, but look at I have all Panasonics. They are called metallized polyester film. The Panasonics, and the orange drops I think are polyester metal film or something like that. So there's a difference in material, but they're able to make them a lot smaller. And I've asked some other guys that I respect their opinion, and they're like, I can't tell the difference. This one also has, the one with the orange drop also has the F&T caps made out of Germany. And I'm using Nichicons and Rubicons in the one with the Panasonics. But as we talked about, the long as the filter caps are doing their job in filtering, and as far as stiffness and all that stuff goes, they're not really making a big difference in tone.
So we're looking at the same amp, just with two different sort of component setups. Do you offer them in this fashion where they're built two different ways, or is just a comparison?
Just a comparison. I sell them both for the same, both amps are for sale, and I kind of do that because I'm a small one-man show here, so I don't have the ability to make a lot of different stuff, or just say, well, I'm just going to keep this amp and not sell it, because everything I make, and I'm not much of a player, so I don't need so many amps to keep, so they're both for sale. And and actually I have these ones still here, both. But if someone really was going to say, I want you to build from scratch for me, you're the amp, but I want this in it, sure, if I got the stuff, I'll put it in for them. I'll do it the way they want.
So what model is this one again?
This is the Arcturus. The Antares is the Soldano type. This is the Arcturus, which is more like two EL34s type of Marshall-y, Jose stuff. In this one, actually, I have one on the bench this one's actually on the bench right now. I added a bunch of features to it. I added the clipping to it. This didn't have the clipping in it. I added the clipping. I added the clipping. I added the switch, the response switches, which is the negative feedback switch, and I added a fat thick switch. I call it the fat switch. So actually, regular position it's fat, but you could flip it to get a tighter, thinner tone out of it too. I just finished that. And I'm adding a pento triode switch, and really that's the last one I have to wire up. It'll be ready to go, but it's actually sitting on the bench, and eventually I'm going to do it to this one too. So it's just got a lot more features now. But like I said, when I did that, I built these a little while back, and I decided I want to add all those features. So what I had to do is I had to tear the front panel off, and I have a laser cutter, so I have to cut new panels and line it all up and drill holes. It's a little bit of a pain, but it's worth it. I think it'll give it a lot more tonal variations, just like the one that you played on, the smaller one that has all that stuff.
I'm trying to find the cold clipping section, and are we getting?
There won't be one on these. I don't put them on, but where it would be, I think Marshall does it in their second stage. I think, these have your typical 3 gain stages and a cathode follower to drive the tone stack. Then the third one is the effects loop. They're all tube driven effects loop. That's the third 12AX7, and then the one before the power tubes is the phase inverter.
So this one right here is your effects loop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you pick up the tube driven effects loop through the Agnator class?
No, I went to his class. He had one there, and at that point, this was like a while back, and I don't know if I was actually started putting effects loops in them. There's a book, and I'm going to get it for you. I'm going to get it just to cover. And I'm sure you probably heard of it. If you haven't, get it. By Merlin Blenko.
Designing tube
Is
preamps
it
for guitar and bass.
Yeah. Is it backwards to you?
No, it looks good.
Okay. Oh, okay. No, I'm just wondering because I'm looking at it, the letterings, everything's reversed. But yeah, designing preamps for guitar and bass, Merlin Blenko. It's a real simple, and it works great. And but the book is great too. But the friend I was just checking out that he's the amp builder, he uses Bruce's. And he told me Bruce helped Soldano redesign the effects loop from the old Soldanos to the new one because the old ones weren't that good.
Oh yeah, he was using like a line level effects loop.
Something like that. And even in Merlin's book, he goes through some like a Mesa, an Orange, and a I think the Soldano. It's probably the old one, and he says why they're not that good. And he said the Angle Fireball actually uses a really good one, and that's the similar one that I have that Merlin suggests. But most builders, if you say Merlin's book, they know who you're talking about.
Absolutely. I mean, he's like the wizard,
Yeah, the valve wizard, he calls it. They call them valves in England, in Britain, they call them valves instead of tubes. So he calls himself the valve wizard. He has a good website too, and it has some stuff that's in his book. Like I think the first chapter of his book is posted on there, but he's a really knowledgeable guy. He just came out with one on power supplies, and then he has another one on hi-fi and hi-fi tubes, but it's got a lot of good tube information in it. So, but his is one of the best books out there.
Yeah, Aiken, AIKEN.
Yes, yeah, that website.
He's got a whole bibliography of great books if you're trying to, learn how to build amps and design them.
There's some other London Power. I forget the guy's name. He's in London, Ontario, Canada.
Oh,
but London Power, he's got a whole big series of books. I'm trying to think of, there's this other guy. They're a little more technical and hard to understand, but what's his name? Richard Kuhnel. I think he's German, but these books are all over too. He has a whole series of them.
Guitar Amplifier Electronics, Basic Theory.
Yeah, but he has a bunch of them. He has one specifically all about the Soldano SLO 100. He has one specifically about power amps, preamps, and he has one about the Bassman 59 Bassman specifically. I mean, he goes into real deep depth dissecting all that stuff. Another great website is, have you heard of Rob Robinette?
No, we can check it out if you want.
Yeah.
What's the website?
Just Google Rob Robinette, and it's not a real fancy website, but he's got great information about Soldanos, Marshalls, and Fenders. We all refer to him as Rob because it's Rob Robinette. I think he refers to himself that too.
Yeah, I wanted to get into that AB 763 model, but yeah, let's check this out real quick. This website. Sure. I'm going to share screen.
Yep, that's it. So yeah, his amp stuff is here. I would just click on that.
I wanted to mention your Soldano clone. You were saying it can take 3 different power section tubes.
Yeah, the current one, I don't know if I'm going to keep it that way, but currently, and it also goes for my EL34 Marshall builds types, the Arcturus. the power transformer puts out about 300 instead of like a Marshall's, I think 350 or 360 on each side. Mine put out 300. It gives the lower voltage, the earlier clipping. That's what I used in the Soldano type one in the Antares. So I'm only getting about 385 volts on the plates, to where a Soldano and a Marshall get almost 100 more volts. So that's certainly going to be a tone difference. So
is yours, sorry, is yours a 50 watt or 100 watt?
Well, it's only 2 power tubes, so it's a max 50. That's another thing. I don't put too much into wattage. You know, I put into what size power tubes. Are they big bottle, medium bottle, or small bottle tubes? But the voltage, I mean, 2 EL34s, you know, with 475, 495 volts on the plates is typically 50 watts. Mine are probably lower, but no one's going to notice the difference because my voltage is lower, although I bias them with the correct amount of current to be up to right around 65 or 70%, which is pretty normal for a push-pull amp. But so the way you could, in this Antares that I built, I had 6L6s in it until recently, and I realized, well, you know, the max voltage for a 5881 is 400, and actually, if you use the JJs, which I usually use those tubes, those are even higher voltage. So I threw some 5881s in there, and it sounds just fine. And that also doesn't change the output impedance on the speaker. So you could actually put 6V6s in there, because 385 is like, isn't really too much overpowering a 6V6. I think the older ones, like the old USA made 6V6s and that they put in fenders, the max voltage was 350 on the plates. However, Fender put 410 on them, and everything just worked out fine, you know, over the years. So, and some people say, well, that's why Fenders go through twos, but that's where they got the hotter, the cleaner sound. So I wouldn't hesitate putting an old NOS pair of 6V6s in there, but you know, the new JJs, they handle 450, 500 on the 6V6s. So you could easily put a pair of 6V6s in there, except for your 4 ohm jack would now be 8 ohm, your 8 ohm would be 16, and your 16 would be 32 to have the correct impedance match. And I'm probably going to try that probably in a week or two, seeing what it sounds like with the 6V6s. You heard how they, you know, they sound really nice in that one you played. Although that's a different amp, but those have about 410, 420 volts on the plates, and they sound fine. The advantage I'm thinking is maybe you'll hit the power tubes with a little more oomph, since they're smaller tubes, you know. So
that's a great implementation for, you know, people all the time want to be experimenting with power tubes, and to just have that baked into the amp is really cool. So nothing needs to be biased in that case.
You need to rebias it. You do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they need to be rebiased. That's the thing. Although if they went and pulled the 6L6s out and put the 5881s in, I wasn't that far off, so it probably wouldn't have fried anything, but I wouldn't have suggested. I mean, so yeah, it definitely has to be biased. There's also an implementation I might try too, is I might start, you know, getting the full power transformers where there's about 475 to 495 on the plates. There is a small circuit that I put in many amps to lower the voltage on just that part of the transformer, to where I could put it in on a switch and say, well, if you're going to run, you know, you flip the switch and drop it down 75 or 100 volts if you're going to run the 6V6s or 5881s, and, you know, rebias it. So a tech should be the one doing it, or you can flip the switch and put 6L6s in it too. So that might be an option too.
Nice. So here we're on your website. I mean, just because it was already pulled up. Okay, so we talked about the Arcturus.
Yeah, it needs updating. It does need updating. That Arcturus is the one we've been talking about. They're white or black, but now I've added those 4 switches to it. The fat switch. It still has it. This one had a crunch, so it's a fat, a crunch. The fat crunch. The what else? The fat, the crunch, the one with the negative feedback. It's so new, I forget what I'm calling it. Response and gosh, I have to take a look.
You've got a effects loop level right here.
Oh, the saturation. So
Nice.
I've added the fat switch, kept the crunch lead switch, the saturation switch, and the response switch will now is added on these. It's added on the black one. Then on the effects loop on the back, there's a bypass switch added onto it too. And then there's also added onto it now, there will be a pentotriode switch. The foot switch jack is for the solo boost, and I'm trying to put that on most of mine. Basically, it's a second master volume. It's where it says solo. There's a little blue light that comes on when the solo's on. What it is basically, you got your master volume set to one loudness, and then you crank the solo a little higher. So when you want to do a lead, you hit the solo foot switch, and it just gives you that boost in volume. Doesn't give you really a gain boost, just a loudness boost.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, that's like reminiscent of the Egnator boutique kit. Has the same function.
I think that's how he does it too. I think that's also how Egnator did. I think that's what Mesa did. And I know some other builders said that's a pretty simple implementation to do that. So basically it turns off the master and turns on the solo. So it just makes you have 2 master volumes that you go back and forth between, one set higher. That's all. There is another way to implement that in the effects loop. If you put like I will use an EQ, like the Boss EQ pedal, and if you just use it as a boost, you could put it at the end of the chain in the effects loop, and that'll do kind of the same thing. So that'll also give you a solo boost.
Oh yeah, people have been doing that, for quite a long time to get that. The metal guys and Dimebag, they made that popular.
Okay.
Especially with like a Furman PQ3, that's a parametric EQ.
Okay.
Sort of did the same thing that you're describing, but it also allowed for EQ shaping, which
okay.
So like I haven't heard of Haybor transformers. Are you?
Yeah, they're big. They're actually pretty big in the boutique. Most boutique guys use them. I think that's what Bruce uses in his boutique kits. They have a real primitive. They're real homespun, but they're pretty well known. They don't have much of a website, but I'm pretty sure Bruce uses them. I believe that there's a lot of boutique people that use them, and they don't have anything really listed. You got to give them a call because they're really more of a wholesaler. But if they have something lying on the shelves, or if you want something in particular, they'll make it for you.
They're out of Michigan, right by.
Yep.
So, okay, Mojo Tone.
Mojo Tone sells theirs, but I'm trying to think of some of the boutique guys. I think Friedman has used them. I don't know if he uses them exclusively, but I think Friedman uses them. Paul Reed Smith amplifiers did use them. I don't know if they still do, but I found them just to be really good, full, balanced sounding, reliable, and they're not that bad priced, really.
Yeah, I hear it's, I don't know if you've heard of like Dr. Dan. He's up in Nova Scotia. He makes Marshall clones. And I mean, I've even heard Soldano talk about, certain companies getting out of the market. And Mercury, I guess they just had like a death in the company, so
Oh, okay. You know,
it's like,
Mercuries are great, but they're so expensive.
yeah. Have you
And
ever
they're
heard of
priced.
Magnetic Components in Chicago?
Yeah, they closed.
Oh, they closed.
Unfortunately, yeah, because I've used them before through my experimentation, and I really did like them. And I know Curran at Custom Audio used them, and he had a bunch. He might still have some on hand. They didn't last through the pandemic, and so
Um,
and they were very good and very reasonably priced too. And I was actually going to switch to them just because they were better, a little bit better price than Hybor, and they would fit my needs because they sold kits. They sold like a kit that was basically the power output and the choke for a JCM 800 build, and that is basically, you could use that in so many different things. And they had a bunch of fender replacement stuff, but yeah, they went out of business, and actually Hybor bought a bunch of their equipment. So
oh, that's cool.
yeah, and you know, Hybor got really busy in supply chain issues and stuff, and I don't think it was Hybor supply chain. They just got really busy, and it took a good 3 to 5 months for them to make me 5 sets. There's a place in New Mexico called Edcore. They're cool looking. They're all like a nice shiny blue painted, but they're really good too. They're used quite a bit for hi-fi, but they sound, any hi-fi to me sounds great in a guitar amp, because they have a wide frequency range, which the guitar amp doesn't even use the range that high. And then there's Hammond in Canada. They're pretty good too.
I've heard that, I've heard Friedman talk about Hammond and also Dr. Dan in the past.
Mhm.
Is this your AB 763 model?
Yeah, that one I did sell it to a guy. What is the story behind this one is that I wanted to make an amp that would be the basis for a clean channel on a 2-channel amp. And I still haven't made the 2-channel amp, but that was it. This one probably gets a little more gain than I'll put on a as a clean channel. But I made this, and actually it's a nice sounding amp. It's kind of based off the AB 763. It's got my own touches to it, but I just sold it a couple months ago to the guy that was actually playing the one that you played in the video. He's a good player, so I caught him playing a bunch of stuff. So it's basically like a Fender blackface reverb without the reverb. It's got an effects loop instead, so it's got just 2 gain stages, not wired too hot. It's got a typical Fender tone stack coming off the plate of the first gain stage. It's got the tube driven effects loop, which can give it, my effects loops, if you wire them or use different components, it could also give it a gain boost. It's got the solo boost on it, but instead of like a blackface deluxe with 6V6 as Fender makes, does not, it has a tube rectifier. This has a solid state rectifier. So other than that, and this one actually particularly had a lower voltage, because it's what I had, to spare to, make as a prototype. But the ones I'm going to make are going to have the higher voltage, so there's going to be a little more clean headroom. And then I'm going to make one very similar to this as a model in itself, and then this is also going to be the basis for the clean channel.
Let's take a listen to it real quick.
Okay.
Oh, okay, that was just a couple licks.
Yeah.
Yep, that definitely gives a blackface basement sound. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's more of a Fender. He's using a really nice Les Paul. The
Was that
guitar he's using is a really nice Les Paul.
Oh, okay. So that fat, bold humbucker sound. Was that dimed or was that?
You know, I can't figure it. It definitely, now that's another thing. I'm glad you asked. It has a gain, like, you know, on a blackface it has volume and that's it. There's no master volume. This has the volume, I call it a gain, and then I actually put a master volume on it. So it's kind of like having a preamp gain and a post-amp gain. So I don't know where he was driving it pretty good to get that kind of breakup on it, though. So he might have, I can't see, he might have had the gain up pretty high, and then yeah, it's hard. It looks like the gain was at least halfway, and I think he had it appears that he had the master and the gain up about both halfway, which is pretty loud. And you know, I'm told black faces start to break up around there. This one might break up a little earlier.
Now, what wattage was that?
What's that?
What wattage was that one? The 760?
It's only about 18 to 22, somewhere in there. It's two 6v6s. That one's probably a little lower because the voltage is lower. Like I said, I know everyone wants the wattage, but I don't put a lot of stock into it because loudness and wattage aren't always like, well, there's a connection there, but they say a 50-watt amp and a 100-watt amp is very negligible in wattage, but it's a lot more in price. Like it's only 3 decibels higher in actual to your ear loudness, but it's twice the power. So, and because I don't always use the standard voltages, like my one with two EL34s might only be like 35 or 40 watts, but you're not going to get you're not going to ever play it with the master volume even halfway up, you know, so it's definitely loud enough. But as I said, that one was probably somewhere between 18 to 22.
It sounds like part of like your identity as a builder is running lower plate voltages, and that's sort of like, you know, what you prefer to explore, and it allows for flexibility and seemingly a lot of you know, headroom.
Well, yeah, actually, it's less headroom.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it does. It does seem to be that way, and it has been. I don't know how long it's going to stay that way, but you know, because when I built the Arcturus, what we're looking at now, I was really thinking, you know, I should really build this to the standard that Soldano built it, which is 100 volts higher, which is a lot. But I had these nice beefy transformers from Highbore that were brand new that I wanted to use. And then it dawned on me, I said, well, I could put the 5881s in there, and he uses that now. He has the SLO 30, which sounds incredible. And that's what I got in there now. And I thought, well, I could even put the 6v6s in it. And then I'm thinking, well, maybe next batch I'll get away from that low voltage. And as I was saying before, I could put the switch in it so we could have 6L6s, 6V6s, or 5881s. So for versatility. And putting that switch in is, you know, the switch is a few dollars, you know, $5, and the circuit part is maybe less than $10. So it's really not that hard to implement. It just, you have to know what you're doing to change it. So,
sure.
But yeah, it's starting to become a little bit of the identity.
Let's listen to this. Kernan Murphy from Custom Audio Mutation. That
Yeah.
dude's a shredder.
Oh yeah, he could play. It was the first time I heard a real guitar player play on it. Than me just noodling around and trying to get some chunky sounds out of it and stuff. He's good, and he's a good amp builder too. You know, he'll be a good.
Sorry, that just played on its own. But what power tubes were in this during this demo?
5881s. I just put those in a couple days ago just to see, and they sound great. He was going to actually let me borrow one of his SLO 30s to compare it, but we talked and he gave me some feedback, no pun intended, about what I could do. And he liked, you know, Soldano doesn't have a fat tight switch. Mine does, and he played it with the tight on the whole time, which he liked. So it's kind of a little bit of a it's a little bit of you know, a feature that a Soldano doesn't have. We decided I'm gonna do a few things to maybe tame down they call it the ice pick or the shrillness a little bit, and I'm going to take some of the gain away, because it has almost too much to where when you have the gain cranked up all the way, it almost turns into mush. And Soldanos do that a little bit. Mine does it a little more, but the reasons why is because it's not the same exact circuit as a Soldano, but it's really easy to take gain away. And we also both discussed too is that when you turn the gain up, like when he was playing it, the gain wasn't even halfway up, so it has it has so much gain to where when it's cranked, the gain is cranked all the way up. It's really too much, and it's really because there could be there is such thing as too much gain to where it doesn't sound good, and it kind of almost compresses and sounds mushy. He suggested I keep maybe a little bit of the mushiness there because some of he called them the doom players like that stuff. But when you switch it into crunch mode, and it's a real easy change too. It's just a matter of a resistor change. It sounds really good when the gain's cranked, but it's almost stopped too much for a crunch mode. So I'm going to dial down the gain a little bit and add a few things in there to tame down some of the treble. But other than that, I was pretty happy with it.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking during the course of, you know, not just this Zoom, but in general, it seems like there's a pretty even distribution of you know, target markets between you and Brunswick, Custom Audio Mutation. You know, there's even some guys in the area, you know, in Chicago. That's a little far off from Ohio, but
you're in Cincinnati, right?
I'm in Cincinnati.
Okay.
So we've got KSR over here and Reeve
Yeah.
custom.
Reeves, yeah.
But,
We got Dr. Z up here, who's internationally known.
oh, that's
You
a
know,
big one.
yeah, yeah. Well, Reeves and KSR are up there too. I know KSR is. He's a
KSR,
nice guy. He's a nice guy. I like about KSR is he's real approachable, because I mean, I've never met him in person, but I've you know, messaged him online and asked him questions, and he's real good. He's an engineer. I'm not an engineer. You know, I've learned this all online and through classes and stuff. And he makes everything. If you follow him on Instagram, he makes everything in his shop. I mean, he makes his cabs, he makes his pedals. He'll show the powder coating, a bunch of pedals coming out of the powder coating oven. I mean, he does everything there, you know, which I think is pretty cool. But he was an engineer. He's got some pretty cool amps, and there's actually a guy who I was at Ignator's class with him, and he works for him now, because that guy lived down in the kind of in that Indiana area down there by Cincinnati on the river there. So he works for him. So
he does Agnator's cabinet work now.
oh, does he? Okay. I know he does cabinet for I think George Metropolis too. You heard of Metropolis? Metro amps. Yeah.
Sure.
So Metro, that guy seemed pretty approachable too. I've messaged him for stuff online too. So just questions or whatever. But yeah.
How much is each respective model for your amps?
Right now, the Regulus is the one that you played with the 2.6v6, and the Marshall Jose type mods is $12.99. The slow Arcturus, no, I'm sorry, the Antares is $16.99 as it is now, and the it's $14.99 for the Arcturus, which is the bigger Marshall type. Subject to change, because I'll be honest with you, I haven't really run down through it since the inflation and the tube, you know, prices have increased and everything's increased. I haven't really ran through every part in it and did a spreadsheet on it. It's been a while, so they're subject to go up, but as of now, this is what they are.
What about the AB 763?
I don't know yet, because I don't even I haven't even got a guesstimate on that. I'm thinking it's going to be a little less than the Regulus, because it's going to have less in it, you know. Sure. But I'm going to be figuring on current prices for that, so it's yet to be seen. So it's just one of those things where it's tedious and it's not fun, but I need to do it eventually, you know, to go through it. And I think, you know, regardless, they're still pretty reasonably priced, considering, you know, what you're getting, you know, hand wired. You know, any tech would love to open that up and work on it, as opposed to like a Fender, what do they call the Fender Hot Rod Deluxe with all the, you know, cheap printed circuit boards. Printed circuit boards are fine, but if they're cheap, they're a pain to work on, and you know, so you're getting a good quality amp too. And I do guarantee them for 5 years.
Wow.
Other than the tubes, you know, the tubes 90 days. You know, if you went in and did something and really modded it, didn't know what they're doing, and they blew something, I'm probably not going to do that. But like, I'm not going to honor it. But for the most part, I mean, other than a tube blowing and, you know, they're pretty solid, you know, amps and well built. And I don't worry about them I don't worry about them having problems, but if they do, as long as you can ship it to me and take care of the shipping, I can fix it for you. So
is that, speaking on the board, is it an eyelet board, turret board?
eyelets. Yeah. Oh, okay. I like eyelets. Turrets are actually cooler and they're nicer to work with, but eyelets are a little less expensive. And you know, I can buy 1,000 of them for like $56 or something.
Oh my God, that's nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they used to be about 10 years ago, they were about $30 for 1,000 of them. I buy the boards. The boards are made out of it's a fiberglass type material. There's the red ones and those yellow ones are slightly different material. They both work well, but I like those yellowy green, snot green ones, looking ones better, because they cut nicer on the saw and they drill nicer, and they kind of just, the eyelets press in there nicer. Yeah.
1699 is a damn good price for something that's that close to a Soldano.
Yeah, well, and it's pretty close. I mean, it doesn't have the clean channel in it. But one thing, when I do add a channel, I'm going to add a clean channel to that. And I'm going to start making, I'll probably keep the same name, but just add deluxe to it because it'll have 2 channel. It's going to be, you know, Soldano's clean channel sounds really nice, but it doesn't have, it has its own gain and master volume, but it doesn't have its own tone stack. It shares the same tone stack, and mine will have a separate tone stack too. So, and mine will be more based like kind of a kind of like the AB 763 will be the clean channel, because that's really only 1 tube needed. It'll probably sound a little different because it's going to be going into the power section. That's not like a Fender. It's like the Soldano. But,
Sure.
But when I do make the 2 channel, I'm hoping it'll be a little even more versatile than a real Soldano.
Well, that's a cool concept, having a Fender basement in channel 1 and
Yeah.
a slow lead channel in channel 2.
Yeah, and the crunch and the crunch switch. Like a lot of people, you know, one guy, he wanted an amp, and he decided he didn't want it because I told him it was a smaller one I built. I actually have another model. I'm kind of discontinue. It's like a Class A single-ended EL34, but it has it's a crunch lead. I called it rhythm lead, but it's really a crunch lead. And when you dial it down into the crunch or the rhythm, it cleans up pretty nice. But the problem is it doesn't have its own master volume, so it's really not another channel. It's just a mode. And he thought, like, he goes, well, when I click it down, it gets real quiet and it only has 1 master volume. And I told him, I said, well, that's what it is. That's all it is. Because he wanted a foot switch added. And I said, I can, and I've done it before, but I stopped doing it because it really doesn't make a lot of sense, because it's just as easy to walk over and flip it and save the money that it costs me to hook up, you know, a relay, another power supply, and all that stuff. So people sometimes refer to it as the rhythm or the clean channel, or the rhythm or lead channel, or the crunch or lead channel. It's really not a channel, it's a mode. Sure,
yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of the relays, you're not using the Vactrols, right? You're just using relays.
My only experience with the Vactrols is in Fender amps, and I never really had to mess with one because they seem to work on the amps I get. But it's going to be relays. There's a lot of talk now in the amp groups that I'm in about using solid state relays. I'm not there yet. I've used mechanical relays successfully. There's issues with popping and all that stuff. Bruce uses Vactrols, doesn't he?
I believe in one of the amps there's something to that effect.
A light
emitting diode, light emitting diode, and then there's another function for it.
Yeah,
but
those are Vactrols. I think Vactrol's actually a brand name. Yeah, I haven't yet, and I don't plan on using them.
Optocoupler.
Yeah. That's what. But LDR, light LDR stands for something. Light something resistor.
Light dependent resistor.
Yes, that's it. So no, I haven't. Nothing wrong with them, but I'm going to use relays because that's what I have, and I've kind of learned how to use them. But there's also better ways of implementing the relays too, which involve more experimentation and all that stuff. But as far as just a working crude set that will switch and satisfy most people, I kind of know how to do that.
I think the LDRs is that there's 2 different options when you switch. One of them is close to complete shunt when it's turned off. Then the other is close to, you know, completely open. Mm-hmm. So it takes away that negotiation that occurs, you know, when you're switching. So it takes away some of the pop, and that's all it does.
Yeah.
But they're so damn expensive. They're like, right now they're $15 or $20 a piece for.
Oh, really? They're that? Yeah, that's a lot. Those, yeah, I want to learn more about the solid state relays too. So there's a lot of different stuff out there as far as channel switching that's probably much better implementation. I just haven't got there yet. But The relays will do it though. There's a lot of really good amps out there that are using relays too. So
Yeah, totally. Are you considering anything for the future? Any builds that you've wanted to make that are on the back burner?
well, the Antares was I've told for the last 3 years I've been saying in 6 months I'll have it like a Soldano like it. So I've been saying that for 3 years, but I finally have something. Adding the second channel to my models. I don't know if I'll be able to add it to the Regulus, only because I don't think much more is going to fit in that small frame. It would have to be a big one, but I could do it. So adding the second channel is going to be a priority. There is some other like, I've had this vision of like you heard a train wreck?
No, absolutely.
Okay, so like a train wreck to where if it's a dual channel, it's like a Fender clean blackface clean channel, then a train wreck for the dirty channel. That's an idea, but just really I spend so much time trying to refine what I have. I really do need to spend more time on other models though.
Yeah, I've got some ideas in mind personally that I just discovered this Australian amp, this Melbourne, Australia 70s Strauss Warrior.
Okay.
I think it's 6 KT88s.
Oh my gosh.
800 watt plate voltages, or 800 volt plate voltages, 350 watts of tone in this guitar player from a band, Colored Balls. They were like the heroes of the Sharpie movement, which is just a bunch of like tattooed pseudo like skinhead mullet Australian dudes from the 70s.
Okay.
But
that sounds insane. I mean, I can imagine how heavy it must be because of the weight of the transformers and all that. I mean, that's insane. But
oh man, you should listen to some of those live recordings from Colored Balls. They've got a song called Human Being, and then God, which stands for Guitar Overdrive.
okay.
And it's something totally unique that I've never heard. And that guy, Lobby Lloyd, influenced Angus Young and Rose Tattoo. So this guy, I mean, it's hard to believe that they were doing that in the 70s, but there's the Strauss Warrior and then the Strauss Polka 200, but they have like a Polka 50, 100, 150, and 200. But I don't know. I want to experiment with that someday, but 800 volt plate voltages for the output.
Well, I know they can handle that, although that means you got to drive the screen voltages down probably a lot. Probably a separate power supply for the screen voltages, because, you know, the one thing, I don't know if Bruce taught in any classes, but guitar amps are really pushed to the limit, especially the power tubes. And because, you know, they weren't made, no one thought of tubes pushing all this distortion. Distortion was bad back in the day, you know. Yeah, that's why they kept cleaning up the black face to the silver face, and it's like, well, we don't like all this distortion. It's like, no, we like the distortion. But so it's like the screen voltage and the plate voltage on pentos and the beam tri or tetros or whatever they call it, the 6L6s. They're pretty close in voltage, and you're actually overdoing the screen a little bit, you know. But when you get up to that super high voltage, like 800, you probably need to put the screen voltage where the specs tell you to, you know. But it's interesting. That's interesting. I'm going to stick with 2 power tubes. Yeah, unless I was just talking to Curran today about that, and we were saying that he only does 2 power tubes. A lot of people say, oh, there's a different feel for the 4 power tubes or the 100 watt versus 50 watt. And like I said, there's only 3 decibels difference. It's twice the power, but only 3 decibels to your ears.
Sure.
And he said, yeah, he's going to. And I said, yeah, I will probably end up, once I get my new chassis made, because I'll be able to fit 4 6L6s or EL34s on the chassis, but it means more expensive transformers and more expensive, more tubes and more work. So I said, well, I'll probably do it if they wanted, but it's going to be custom work and it's going to be expensive, and it's going to be something I'm usually not going to advertise, but they insist I need this amp, but I want, instead of those 2 EL34s, I want 4. I'll say, okay, well, I need a deposit. We're going to order this up front. And, I got to order, because I don't keep that stuff on hand. Well, I do have a few things on hand that would handle it, but I typically don't use it to that.
So are you willing to make custom amps for people?
I'd rather stay away. Curran does.
Curran, yeah.
Yeah, that's his whole name, Custom Audio. We talked about that. Because if I'm not putting out the same thing that I'm used to, it's more work. And I don't know if it's more work that someone wants to pay me for. And then it's like, I don't always know how it's going to turn out. It's like, well, I never made that before. It might sound like crap, Or I'd rather do what I'm comfortable with and maybe make some tweaks to it. Like I said, I was saying that, well, if someone wants to come here down to my shop here in my basement where I'm at now, and they want to come here and buy it, they said, well, why don't we throw it up on the bench and we'll bias it a little colder or hotter, see where you like it, instead of me just putting it at 65, 70% and, there. Or, oh, I could make it a little bit, I could make tweaks while they're there, but just to, say, I'm going to make you this and it's going to sound like this. That takes a lot of work on my end of it, to really get it. Because like I've been working on this Soldano in my mind for 3 years. It finally came out. It took me a few months and I took it out today and it's still going to be tweaked a little bit, and that's only because he has one, that we could put it up next to. So that's a lot of work doing custom stuff. Even with modding, I mean, I will, try and do it for somebody, but I really prefer not to, because I've been told this by other people, unless I know that mod and I feel, hey, I've taken this plexi, I've done this mod, I could do that. Or someone brings me a Marshall and says, can you make your Marshall sound like my your Arcturus? I could possibly do that if the insides let me do it, if there's the space or whatever, I could do that. But if they said, hey, I want you to do the blah, blah, blah mods, and I don't really know what they are and I never did them before, I'd probably say no, because you might say, oh, I don't really like it. Because that's happened, I guess, not with me, but it's happened with other people. They're like, I really don't like it. And it's like, well, that's what you wanted.
I've heard stories like, the Mesa Boogie Mark II C+ is like the thrash metal Metallica lovers holy grail. Mm-hmm. And people request the 2C++ mod, which mm-hmm. just adds more gain to already a ton of gain. And mm-hmm. Mesa told me that sometimes when they do that mod for people, a lot of times actually they want it returned back to the 2C+. And mm-hmm. I'm sure it's a pain in the ass because of all the hard work, but hey, I mean, if they're paying and it's experimentation on their part, I say go for it if you have the patience and the time.
But it's reputation too, because they're gonna go, if they're gonna go out and say, that guy did a mod and it really sucked, and it's just like, then your name's out there. It's like he did the shitty mod, and it's like they're not gonna say, well, that's what I asked for, So I worry about that too, and keeping the customer happy, even if it's their screw up, or their end of it. I want to keep them happy, and I want the reputation out there. There's a lot of things that might still happen. So I won't say never, but that could happen. I'm about a year away, a little over a year away from a Ohio pension and retiring.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I can't wait. I just turned 57. I'll be 58 when I retire. So right now I've been a social worker. I have a master's in social work, and I've been working for counties up here for the last 20 something years. When I was in college, I school bus drove, so that all fed into the pension system. Now I quit about 4 years ago being a social worker, and I'm back to school bus driving because I was burnt out. And so once I can collect the pension and work, I'll have a lot more time on my hands because I won't have to work part-time gigs. So who knows what's going to happen in the future. I'd really like to put more into my amps and actually make more of a living off this and just work part-time.
I've got a social work degree from Cal State LA, actually.
Oh, no kidding. No kidding.
Yeah. I got
Did
the
you ever work in the
degree.
field?
I did a little bit of work with what they call re-entry, which is
Okay.
helping guys that have just gotten out of prison.
Yeah.
And that was cool. You know, like for me, I just sort of realized, you know, maybe I've got some growing as a person to do before I take responsibility for decisions that go on in people's lives. So I decided to kind of like, you know, just do some basic work and get into buying and selling amps and stuff like that. But social work's always there. I mean, I worked a little bit doing it, but you know, I thought maybe I had some growing to do as a person before I took that responsibility in my hands.
Yeah. Well, you do your best, and you know you can't be responsible for the outcomes. But yeah, it's funny. Do you have your licensure in Ohio?
I never got licensed. I only got a bachelor's degree in it.
Ohio has a bachelor's level licensure, which helps. I have a master's, but I only have the bachelor's level licensure. And I just been too lazy to get it. Never really needed it. I could have got like extra money if I got it. Now my wife is a social worker. She has the advanced degree and all that. She still likes her work, but yeah, I worked in juvenile justice and child protective for the most part, and did some substance abuse work and all that stuff on the side. I've always done side stuff, but when I was a kid, before I ever imagined going to college, I wanted to be a rock star, you know, and I played the bass and all that. You're talking 80s, 70s, 80s. I was in the metal, all the hair metal, and I was always in the sound. You know, back in the 70s, they had the really nice stereo systems and stuff, and I always liked audio, and, you know, I played the bass for a while. And then when a time, you know, my early mid-20s, it was time to grow up. So I threw all that stuff aside, said, I'm not going to be a rock star. And I became a social worker. And through that, about 15 years ago, I said, I'm going to get back into music because I always liked it. And everything changed in the internet. And then all of a sudden, I'm like finding out I can mod pedals and I can mod amps. And remember the Epiphone Valve Jr. amp?
Not in particular.
It was a little lunchbox amp with one knob, volume, and it was like, they started at 99 bucks. It had a one power, one 12AX7, one EL84. It was kind of like a Champ. And it was a cool little amp, and everybody was modding the hell out of them. Then they went up to 139. It was still a great deal. And I kind of started from there learning how. And this is like back in like 07, 08. And then I got on the one website, because there wasn't really Facebook groups then, the one website, AX84. And they had some really cool single ended amps, KT88 single ended, and I kind of learned from there. And then they had a bunch of designs on there, and that's kind of all morphed into what I'm doing now, you know. And
nice.
You know, so the hobby of wanting to be an audio engineer and a rock star, because I kind of wanted to do that, it kind of came back, and I ended up doing this, and it's fun. I don't make a ton, but it's fun, you know. But there's hopefully in the future, you know, I don't know. I won't say never to modding. I won't say never to a lot of stuff, but just right now, I can only do so much, you know, and it's going to be building the amps I build and trying to sell them. And I'm looking to maybe do a little more repair. I'm not a big fan of it because it's not as fun, but there's a lot more need for it. I know it keeps some of these guys real busy, you know. So
yeah, so being like a social worker up in Cleveland, is that a pretty challenging city to do things in? I mean, it's
yeah, I worked for Cuyahoga for a long time. But what I found out, I also worked for Summit, and Akron's no picnic either. Akron's like a mini Cleveland. And then I actually worked out in Lorain County, and you know, I was where I'm at, I was an hour drive every day. The money was good. But I find really that when you're in there with the clients in the homes and working with the families, they're all the same. They're all the same, no matter what county they're from. But there's other challenges. I mean, Cleveland, the agency's huge. It's a big bureaucracy. Probably not a lot different from Hamilton County or Franklin, you know.
sure. Well,
But it's all a challenge. And really, it's not the families, it's not the people and all their problems, although some of them could be a real pain. It's the bureaucracy and the demands of, this needs to be done by this day. And when you're working in those fields, you have to be in court, you have to go on the stand and test. You're like a detective almost in some situations.
Sure.
And this report's due this day, this is due this day, you got this, and it's just the juggling act, and the caseloads are too high. And so it just gets to the point where it's just too much work and too high of expectations. The expectations are unrealistic. And I did it for over 20 years. So I just got to the point, I just need 5 years. I'm going to school bus drive and stay in the system, and I'll get my retirement based on my salary based on my salary from when I was at Lorain County, which is pretty good. So, and I've already met with them on Zoom and all that. So April of 24, I can retire. But I'll probably wait to the end of the school year, and hopefully they'll rehire me back so I can have an income and a pension coming. So, well, I was doing some substance abuse counseling on the side up here in Lake County. I don't know if you're familiar with Lake County. It's suburbia.
Yeah.
Maybe when you go way out to the eastern part, it gets to be a little bit farm and rural, but it's basically suburbia. And the heroin, fentanyl problem is pervasive there. You wouldn't know it by going through there, but it's bad. It is really bad. And, these people are struggling just like the ones that are in the projects in Cleveland. So, like what you're saying is that, people have this image of what life's like here, but they really don't understand what's going on in their own backyard half the time, And I live in my address is Chagrin Falls, like it says, but I actually live in Bainbridge Township, which is actually, but it's a Chagrin Falls address. So it's actually Chagrin Falls is Cuyahoga County, and that's my zip code. But I actually live in Geauga County, and I'm on the edge of rural and suburbia, but it's even bad out here. And then now meth is getting bad out here. It's like, those societal problems are everywhere, but people think they're all in just that one section. That's why I say that's why I say when I go into those homes in Cleveland, if I'm in a home in a wealthy area or a middle class area, it's no different. Things are still pretty fucked up. So, yeah.
Well, now the suburbs, like the border of like the suburbs and the cities are like sort of becoming new territories. Like like here in Cincinnati, some of those like little border areas between suburb and city are probably potentially the most crime-ridden areas. And
they do that in Cleveland. They come out from the city and they meet you real close to in the suburb there. And we call them the outer ring suburbs, and they're pretty bad too.
Well, I mean, now
there's a bunch of them in Cleveland. They go all the way around, southeast, north. Yeah.
I don't know about Cleveland downtown, but here in Cincinnati, you've got to be a white collar worker to afford a condo or apartment in downtown. And over the last 15-20 years, it's done a complete 180 flip. And I don't know, it's kind of weird how things are being distributed. But anyways,
it's like that. It's like that in Cleveland too. It's been gentrified in certain areas and downtown, but you still have, you could go 10 blocks and you're in Murder Row. From some, so yeah, it's probably the same. I bet, I was working, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland. It's just, I know Cleveland better, so I know where to go and where not to go and all that stuff. So
we should have a conversation with Brunswick amps. And
yeah, I have Hamley, John Hamley, is it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I met him a while back. He's a good guy. I mean, he's always been nice and, promoting. And actually, I just promoted him today, a guy called Curran, to work on not a Benson, but a Echoplex. And I told him, I said, hey, tell him Brunswick might be able to, because there's kind of a similar thing, because Curran's like, I can't really do much with those, so, we try and help each other out. It's a friendly competitiveness. Oh, by the way, you did an interview with Clifton.
Oh yeah, we went to his shop, actually, his basement, and yeah,
I've been there a few times. Cliff and I hit it off real well, and I'll just tell you a story about him. The one he's always kind of been kind of in my corner, and I'm in his corner. You know, it's just one of those relationships you have from the shows. And the one day he goes, I'm going to NAMM. He goes, I got a bunch of extra tickets. You want to go? I go, sure. This is like 218. So, you know, I went down there and stayed, and I got to hang out with him at NAMM, and he has a couple of my amps, but actually, you might not know this, and it's okay to put this on, but I build his amps for him now. He has a line of amps, and they're very similar to the AB 763. He's got one, it's called the Power Glide, named after his car theme, like the Cleveland, the Windsor, and all that. But amps, I build the chassis for him and the amp, and he puts them in wooden cabinets. So,
so you're Cliff's labeling amps now, huh?
Yeah, and it's been good. I built a couple for him early on just so he had amps, and then he's like, you know, we made this deal. He buys a couple at a time. He's working on another. Well, the model's ready. I just have to, you know, put it on paper. But when he's ready to order, I'm going to build him his second model. But yeah, he labels them Clifton, and I build them for him. He's told me, well, you could put, built and designed by Sloan Amplification on the back, and I just haven't done it yet. But yeah.
Wow, I'm gonna go over to the website real quick. I mean, I know I've always wanted to.
Yeah, I built that one.
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn, that is cool.
Yeah, and he loves them, and they're nice builds. They're beautiful cabinets too.
Seriously beautiful. I like that concept in the back there.
I've never even seen the back of it like that. I like it too. I never even saw it. Actually, I don't think he had it on his website, but it's a good amp. So, and it's easy for me because I don't have to build the cabinet. I just build the chassis. I make the face plates, and it's similar to my AB 763. There's some differences, and we both want to keep it that way. So it's his amp, he wants it unique to him, and it's really, it's basically a Fendery blackface type.
We're living in the era where like some of the coolest amps you can get as a consumer are just like, the guys from your region pretty much. This is so freaking cool.
Yeah, it is. And what's really cool about his amps too is I have a boatload. I'll send you a picture later if I remember. I would go on eBay and I'd buy either used transformers out of Hammond organs, or I would buy transformers out that are new old stock, like Stancor and Thordarson and all these old brand names, Merit. And I just buy them, and I like boatloaded a stock of them in my back room, and I'd occasionally make stuff out of them, and they were fairly inexpensive, but the vintage stuff is really good. They're paper wound and everything, and transformers don't degrade, neither do tubes. They don't degrade. It's not like buying old capacitors or resistors, so they're fine. And he likes it because it fits in with his. So I build them with some of these either used or NOS new old stock transformers, and they sound great, and he likes it because it fits in with his motif of his vibe of vintage or reclaimed. So it works out perfect. I mean, someday I might run out of stuff, but I'll put newer stuff in it, and I'm sure he'll be fine with that. But I have plenty more to go on that. So
I mean, we're right now, as far as I'm concerned, if anyone has the ability to go pick parts from like an old organ, a Hammond or a Baldwin, or antique radios, some of those chassis and amps would fit right into a Vox AC-15, or there's so much you can do to repurpose some of these old transformers, taps, tubes. And I know a guy in Sacramento, well, he was in Northern California, now he's in Oregon, called Amps is his name, and that's exactly what he does. New old stock, new builds, and that is super cool. So that Power Glide, Clifton Guitar Works Power Glide, those transformers are new old stock from like a situation.
Well, I believe both the power transformers are used stand cores. And I know for sure, yeah, they were, I'm trying to think what I put in there. And the output transformers were new old stock. They were brand new. So yeah. And I got plenty more to do that stuff with. He wants the lower powered stuff too. And he's not, you know, he doesn't like too much gain, and he likes getting it from his pedals too. And you know, one thing I've learned, I was never much of a pedal guy, especially overdrive and distortion, but I'm learning they do sound really good on a Fendery type, much better than on a Marshall-y type, just because the way Fender's designed. And he's, you know, so he likes getting his out of pedals. He's not into the super high gain stuff, although he does have some high gain amps in his possession, but he likes more of a crunch. What's that?
He was into those Sloan amps.
Yeah.
What are they called? Like the Sloan, oh God, the hot rod, something like that.
Yeah, I'm not, I know they're good amps, but yeah, he had a Sloan, and then he sold one, he bought another one, then he sold another one. He had one of these smaller, the single-ended high gain ones that I had. I think he put it in the cabinet and sold it. So I think he's going to do well. And he opened up a store, he had the grand opening this weekend in Reynoldsburg. Yeah. You'll have to get in contact with him. That might be a good thing to go up to the store and check it out. I told him as soon as I make it down there, I want to stop by, because it's like a store where he has his guitars. The guy who makes the coin guitar picks is his partner. They're going to have other music related stuff. Like he had a big pick shaped charcuterie board and stuff like that. So it's kind of going to be like a music motif rock. It's called the Rock Syndicate. So
I swear, man, one of the Clifton Cleveland models that is on my bucket list.
It's up. I want the one more shaped like a Strat. Or a Les Paul, but not the Telly type. I can't remember which one it is.
Steve, we had a little bit of a lag. I'm glad you're still there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Oh, okay. We had like a little 5-second lag there. Cliff made a custom Floyd Rose Super Strat for my buddy Gary, who did like some of the demos for the Clifton videos. Actually, in that same camp, Clifton Guitar Works also works with Thimble Wasp, and they just built a Ludwig Phase 2 clone for me. So we've got a really good scene going on here between, you know.
Yeah. There's also you might want to get a hold of Chase Gullett Guitar Company in Delaware.
Okay, let me how do you spell that?
Gullett. I did some amp work for him, but I'm just too it was taking me away from my own stuff, but he makes some really nice stuff. And he's in Delaware. And he does a lot of setups and repairs, and he's kind of the go-to guy in Columbus area.
Dude, I've got a couple things that I might want to talk to you about design wise. Have you ever heard of an El Pico AC 52 or 55?
I don't think so.
So Paul McCartney started the Beatles with that amp.
Okay.
And it was used for the gramophone back in the late 50s, but it's a cathode follower, like I think it's maybe 8 or 10 watt amp. And
you mean cathode biased?
Cathode bias, yeah, sorry about that. I mean, it starts to break up at 9 o'clock, and then if you dime it, it gives you like this almost oscillated, really squashed fuzz tone, which, I mean, honestly, you wouldn't really want to dime it. It almost turns into an octave pedal effect. But if you put the gain around noon, that is such a beautiful natural overdrive. It's so unique, and I've got one sitting over here. I should probably show you that sometime, because I might even want to work on doing a redesign. I've got a schematic for that, and I don't know if you've heard of Watkins from the UK, Charlie Watkins. Some of his
No,
stuff would be amazing to do models inspired by that. And also I see a niche in the market for a Sun Model T clone.
yeah, I've seen those come up a little bit. Yeah, those are like a Fendery type. I think
It's
I've heard. Yeah,
it's
there's
got a
so,
Fendery clean sound, but when you crank them and dime them, it's like a very special, unique KT88 style
oh, okay.
harmonics,
Huh.
and they're big in the doom and stoner metal
Oh,
world.
okay.
But not that that's my thing, but you can use those if you're into like hard rock. It's something different than a Jose Marshall or a Mesa Boogie sound. It's like this unique sort of like really detailed harmonic, bold crunch sound.
Hmm.
Uh, they're like a force of nature. I mean, I could see it.
Sun Model T. I'll have to look that up. Yeah.
You want to borrow one? I could let you borrow one too, or if I go up
I
to
would, but it'd probably sit there till I got around to it. So,
the,
hey, if you got a schematic, go ahead and email it to me. I'm just curious because that's always the key thing. There is like, well, what's the schematic look like, and then I could kind of picture, you know, what could be done to it. And a lot of times, though, those you just want to keep them original if they're old,
I mean,
or keep them where you could change them back without any harm.
pretty much. I mean, it's like if we're talking about the El Pico, I mean, I swear there's a market for that. And I'm always doing some experimentation with the Fryette power station where you can take a 5-watt amp and turn it to 100 watts, and you
I
get this
want one of
amazing.
those. Do you like it?
Oh man, I mean, I don't really see, other than like the speaker reactance, it's amazing to be able to dime out a power section, get all the detail from the power section, and have it at a volume that doesn't piss off your neighbors or people living around you.
Yeah, so it attenuates as well as it boosts, right?
Well, dude, it's like, think about it this way. Like, you can boost a power section to full power, but what it does is it is a power amp. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, it's like taking one amp, cranking the power section, and then using another power section to really give the level. So, I mean, if you think about it, if you dimed both the amp and the Fryette power station, you could get the breakup or like the growl or wall up from two different power sections, and I mean, it's epic. It's got like an effects loop that goes in between the two power amps, and
Yeah. I mean, I'm familiar with it and I've heard a lot about it. And I've never heard a bad thing about it. It's probably one of those things I should get more for like at those shows to where I could get the good power amp, tone, but with a volume where it's not going to piss everybody off.
oh, perfect for that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was going to bring that to the Chicago show, but it was in Kanoki, Illinois, but it was only 4 hours long, and I figured like it's such a small show and it's just
Mhm.
another thing to bring. But
You ever set up at the shows?
I did one show total so far, but I've brought amps to different shows, and
Yeah. I'm
I
going to
met
Pittsburgh Sunday. There's a Pittsburgh show Sunday.
I might consider going up there then. It's
Yeah.
not that far. I like Pittsburgh a lot.
Yeah, it's a nice time. I'm just going for, I'll be leaving early in the morning and getting there and then coming home. I don't do an overnight or anything. But yeah, I'll be there, set up one table. I'll probably bring 4 amps and the basics, the Soldano-ish ones, and then the Marshall-y ones, and see what happens. A lot of times I don't sell there, but I connect like I did with you and everybody else. So, but
Well,
yeah,
yeah.
that power station, I'm curious because I have a Weber attenuator and it does okay, but there's stuff that's better out there. And really, what some people might debate me on it, but what truly an amp, a master volume and a gain, really it's a pre-gain and a post-gain. What you really need is something external to do the loudness, and that sounds like, you know, because especially when you have, because there's a big difference. I could have the gain cranked up and then the master volume low, and then it totally changes the tone and character, but it's also too loud, you know?
Totally, yeah. And like, you know, these amps were designed, you know, the Marshall JMP 50s, JMP 100s, the Mark Series Mesas, any amp really, they were designed to be freaking cranked, because one of the biggest components, just like, you know, is the character of the power section. Every power section has a different character when it's cranked, and by all intents and purposes, that is the character of the amp. And when you master volume it down to 2 or 3, you absolutely miss out on all that.
Yeah.
And you know, another big thing is like designers that are variacing, they have like built-in variacs in their amps. Like I've got a buddy he's kind of in a big band, but he had this Blankenship plexi clone thing that had a built-in variac, and a variac will change the character too. Like,
yeah, and I've done that because I have a variac, because you need them when you're building amps.
Sure.
That was kind of the concept of why I went with the lower voltages, because you're lowering the plate voltages and the amp, but you're not lowering the filament voltages, which you don't want to do. And now I said there's a way with it's a transistor, a couple resistors, and a switch, or you don't even need it, but I could lower the voltage of the amp with doing that. So there's probably a way to hook it up where you could get different, you know, maybe not a dial, but different switching, different voltages. But like I said, I want to do that with my amps, especially the Antares, is where I could flip it and drop it down 75, 100 volts, so they could put in different tubes. Or you could just drop it down to that voltage and you know, use 6L6s, but they're just going to have less headroom and probably a different character to it. So voltages make a difference, you know, and a lot of people kind of don't, you know, they don't really experiment too much with that. And some of them just like that high volt. They say, I like the aggressiveness or the sound to it. So.
Yeah. I guess it's like the difference between, you know, spongy and compressed versus, you know, super tight. Yeah, man. So you're having a switch in the Antares where you switch the bias with an actual switch?
No, what it'll do is it'll lower the secondary voltage on the power transformer. So, but what you will have to do is rebias. So like the 6V6s and the 5881s will run at, like, say, like, you know, if I could drop it down to 380, 400, even up to 410 on the plates, and then take it out of the circuit with the switch, and then it goes back up to 475, 495, around in there for the 6L6s.
Sure.
But when you do that, you got to flip the switch, take the tubes out, rebias, and all that. It'll be an option that, you know, if they could do, I could do it for them, or they could later on, you know, do it with a tech. Some guys know what they're doing. They can also blow things up though too, because if you bias too hot and it's constantly red plating, you could do a lot of damage.
Well, another thing too.
Hopefully you'll blow a fuse first. So
another thing too is if someone's, you know, putting in some power tubes that, you know, don't have much life in them, or they arc, you know, that could be a problem for them. But
yeah,
I mean, like I would
usually like power tubes, most tubes just degrade and just go, and then instead of blow, you know, just boom. Usually that's a defective tube. And one thing I do on my amps too is there's a bias for each tube, not just one dial, and you got to match a set. So I can get the exact pretty
Oh my
much the
God.
exact, yeah. And I don't know why a lot of people do it. And I think matching tubes is overrated. And it's like, well, if one's at 34 milliamps and one's at 36, it's not a big deal. It's still considered matched, but I could nail mine right on. I could dial them both in because I got two pots, one for each one, and it's really not that big of a deal to do. So
Man, I'm gonna take this clip and put that at the front of the video. Like, if you want to explain that one more time, like, because that's a pretty cool thing. Not many designers do that. Just
yeah. Well,
if you want to go through it one more time.
yeah, each tube has its own bias pot. So you could bias each one exactly where you want it, and you don't have to worry about matching tubes. Where most have one pot for two tubes or one pot for four tubes. This one has two, one for each tube. I usually only have two power tubes in my amps. So you could, if you stick a set of tubes in there, you could get each one at the exact milliamps that you want. So you don't have to worry too much if the set's not matched or matched real close.
Man, you're the first designer that I've heard implement that into their amp. I mean, that is like invaluable for a lot of people.
Yeah. It might be a little overrated for some people, but to me, it's just for the simplicity of doing it, and the extra cost is really nothing. To me, it's worth doing. Fender in the silver faces, when you bias theirs, it's a balance thing. Instead of like pushing the voltage up or down, it just balances it out. So Fender kind of did it, and it was in their silver faces. They did it, and they stopped doing it. But what some people have done with those is they put a pot on that pot. So they have one that pushes the voltage, and then one that balances it, and it kind of ends up doing the same thing.
Man.
That's the only one. And I seen some kits, Weber speakers in Indiana. When I never bought one of their kits, but I looked at their kits and they had it set up that way too on their schematics where they did. I just never bought one. So, there's probably a reason why some don't do it, but I can't think of, I'm not really saving much space on the board, and it's only those pots are, a buck or something, and a little, that's really about it. So I think it's money well spent.
I hear people on forums talking about it all the time. I mean, people mess with power tubes, preamp tubes more than anyone imagines. Like we're getting into like an amp market where everybody's turning into an informed consumer end user.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, with all the possibilities, I feel like there's like a new breed of guitar and amp enthusiasts that are going to be experimenting in this way, and like really it's just pushing the whole art of it forward.
Yeah, I agree. And I was talking with another builder, and he said he truly thinks the future is smaller, boutique, handmade than the mass-produced stuff that comes out of China. Some of it's okay. And I understand if you only have $400 or $500 and you want to buy a used Black Star and it gets kind of where you want to go. But I think, there's also people out there that are totally willing to spend $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 on really a good, high quality, killer sounding amp, depending on what they play, what type of music they play. And the same with the guitars too. I mean, there's guys who, all I need is a Strat, all I need is a Gibson, but some of these, custom made ones or these, boutique made ones, they're different. And I talked to Clifton and we talked about, you go to these shows and Karen said the same thing. It's like, how many Strats and Les Pauls can you see? Great guitars, but like, hey, this guy's got something a little different, and that's kind of like where we kind of fit in. Yeah, it's a little different. It's a little more expensive, but I think you're getting what you pay for, definitely.
Yeah, and there's the boutique, low wattage school of thought, and then there's the guys that like can't play anything that's not 100 watts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I can make a really nice sounding single-ended Class A 5-watt amp, but it limits. The one thing, I've never got that effects loop to work real well with a single-ended Class A, and that's one of the reasons I'm stopping making them. but you know, cranked up, you know, you could play in a small club, but you can't play anything but it cranked up. So, you know, you got, if you're playing high gain, you know, it'll work, you know, and they're kind of fun at bedroom level, you know, and they're more than bedroom level. I don't know, people use that word. It's like, I don't know. I don't know, that 14-year-old kid, his parents are going to get pissed if he plays it at bedroom level, you know? So, but you know, that's what I started out making, just a single-ended, you know, EL84, single-ended 6v6, you know, and you know, I like the low wattage stuff, and they're nice and lightweight and small, but it's probably not enough for most people. They want that sweet spot, that 15 to 25 watt, you know, where they could, you know, walk in with a combo, and I don't make combo. They want a combo in one hand, the guitar in the other, and they're all ready to go, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
I mean,
combo's another thing that could come up in the future too.
I feel like solid state amps, beginner level amps, but some solid state amps are pretty cool, like the Holmes Mississippi Blues Master, obviously the Roland JC120 and that whole family. There was this designer in the UK called Blue Tone, and they were ran by the designer of Midas consoles, and he did a solid state interpretation of a JTM 45. He did a really good job of that. And I mean, Dimebag, you know, he played the Randall.
Yeah, I heard that.
The Randall sort of like JCM 800 type amp. The model number's escaping me, but you know, like I think solid state has its place too, and maybe it's
well, the digital. I consider digital modeling and solid state two different things. Like there's tube, solid state, and digital modeling. The digital modeling is really cool. I mean, you know, those Kempers or those Axe effect or whatever they call them, Axe, the Helix. Those things are really cool. And hey, I had a Line 6 when I was building tube amps, just because it's like sometimes you just want to get a certain tone and sit down and, you know, it does what you need. And I'm not a gigging musician, but I got no issue with those things. And, you know, I've heard enough stuff now that like a lot of these big time musicians travel with the digital stuff because it's more reliable, you know, and they record with two, but you know, who's going to know in a stadium of 70,000 people or an arena of 20,000 people that they're not using a real tube amp? Most of them won't know. So they have their purpose. There is some solid state implementation stuff you could do in a tube amp though. And there's one I especially want to try. I actually have the drawing sitting up on my bulletin board here. The cathode follower, part of a lot of the Marshalls and a lot of amps where it drives the tone stack, the cathode follower. Bruce uses those too, I'm pretty sure. There's a transistor. It's a MOSFET, I believe, or some type of FET transistor that it can emulate that cathode follower pretty well, and it takes high voltages that tubes do. And the cool thing about it is they said you can't overdrive it, because you don't want to overdrive a transistor. It's going to sound, that's where the difference is when you start getting the squaring of the wave, or what do you call it, the clipping. Transistor clipping doesn't sound good. Tube clipping sounds good. So, but you can't really do it with this chip. So you put in, it puts out, and it doesn't clip, and it'll drive the tone stack. Well, that'll take out a half of a tube, a 12AX7. So like in my Antares, I have, 1, 2, 3, I have 1/2 tube socket that's open and it's wasted. And so if I use, and that's just how it is. If I use that setup, then I could get a lot more space back because I wouldn't have that one tube there. There's also, and the guy in Head First Amplification, he's in Melbourne, Australia too. He has a little board out, and there's a certain transistor that could sound pretty tubey. And I think if you put it in the first section of the power amp or of the preamp, you could get some drive, almost like having a pedal drive out of it too. So there are some implementations I might, but anyhow, if you remind me an email or message, I can send you links to that stuff. It's stuff that's worth looking up. But the transistor follower, the MOSFET follower instead of the cathode follower, that's in Merlin's book too. So yeah, so
Wow.
there's some cool stuff that's, and then, so it kind of would behoove me to learn a little bit more about solid state devices, because actually that thing where I lower the it's called an amplified zener, where you lower the voltage, and I'm talking about putting it on a switch. That's also done with the transistor too, but it's in the power section, so it doesn't really affect the tone of the amp. It just affects, the voltage of it. So there's some solid state implementations that are worth looking at.
Well, I mean, to save, space, a tube socket, all the wiring and,
Yeah.
resistors that go into
Sooner or later,
X7.
yeah, that real estate becomes valuable, especially in that smaller one. If I want to keep it in a small box, I got a lot crammed in there, and it actually, it doesn't sound noisy or anything. But I don't know. That's why I doubt I'd be able to make it a 2-channel amp, because there's no room on the front plate either, really, for more knobs, unless I stack them, have them like, clean here and then dirty here, which I don't want to do.
Well, what do they call them? Like the double pot thing, the push pull switches. I guess that could save some real estate.
Yeah, that could too. Yeah, that actually, and that might happen too. Although I got my switches sorted in a nice place to where they're kind of on the top, but in the middle of my knobs. So that I kind of got that worked out. Well, one of the things too is that I'm trying to buy 10 chassis at a time, and they're all pre-drilled and CNC'd. So I want it to be the chassis to work for multiple different amps. I was just talking to Kern about that today too. So, and that's one of the things, is a small builder, you want to kind of be as efficient as possible. So, I'm going to have 2 different size amps, really pretty much 2 different sets of transformers, the smaller ones and the bigger ones, for the new stuff. And you kind of try and just fit in what you can, and possibly even make the boards multi-purpose too, to where, okay, this board will work for 3 different models, so that way it just makes things more efficient. And if you become real busy, it'll scale a lot nicer too. So,
do you ever have to drill any new holes into chassis for certain functions or mods or anything?
Yeah, and actually, I had told you that the Arcturus, I have those 2 models I showed you. I had to do that because that was my old chassis where I hand drilled everything, and so the holes weren't already there, and so I had to take the plate off, take everything off the front panel. I put this wooden jig on it, and I drilled the holes in it, and then I put the new panel on and put all the switches on. Now, the new chassis, the holes are pre-drilled, so all I do is have to pull the plate off and then put a new plate on with the labeling, and then the hole's already there. It's just a pain in the butt, but it's doable.
We just had some lightning outside. It's like February 20th, and there's a friggin' thunderstorm rolling in.
We had one in January, December up here. It was crazy.
Yeah, we should talk to Kieran, get him on here.
Oh, Curran's cool. He's a talker. He's a freaking phenomenal guitar player. He's got a really nice gig going on. I mean, he does recordings. He does recordings. He does guitar work. I mean, I don't think he wouldn't consider himself a luthier, but he does refrets and everything. He builds amps. He's an amp dealer for all of that boutique company that Soldano runs now. He's got Soldanos. He's got diesels. He's got it's a cool setup. So you should make a road trip one day to come visit him and me, because he's only about 40 minutes from me. So,
yeah, that sounds good, man.
And we try and help each other out, and ask each other questions, and it works. So
that's what, people from Ohio and, this whole region, it's all about. I'm not saying like it's better than any other region, but there's like a, working mentality here, and everybody helps each other. And for the most part, I mean, maybe not all the time. There's some designers that are like hermits that never want to talk to anybody. So
yeah. Well, my theory behind it, and I think, if everybody would, not everybody, but if people will really start switching to the higher quality stuff, instead of the cheap junk that's out there, just spend a little more money, you know, there's plenty out there for all of us. You know, it just people have to make that switch. If someone decides I'm tired of buying the $500 or $600 amp and I'm going to buy something I really like that I'm going to really be happy with, that's going to give me a good warranty, and the repair guys will go, oh God, I don't want to touch that thing. That type of stuff. I think there'd be plenty there for everybody. Like Curran says, there's money on the table there for all of us.
Well,
And
dude,
not that I'm doing a ton of business, but there's really a lot more I could do to push myself. I'm not there yet. I'm more. Go ahead.
You know what that brings to mind? Sorry, it just popped into my head, but sort of like a parent company where all these builders get together, and the inventory, the need for the inventory gets expanded. So you get cheaper components and parts because you're putting in these huge orders, but it's all under the umbrella of like whatever you want to call the company,
Yeah,
Ohio boutique
that's
builders.
Not a bad idea, like a buyer consortium. Well, that's why Curran got so busy he had to slow down, and he's looking to change to and I'll let him explain, but he's looking to move to PCBs. And he has a lot of stock that he still has to use up, and I know how that goes before he starts I'm gonna see if maybe we could get our chassis from the same people, but instead of me buying 10, we both buy we buy 25 or 50, and get a better price. But we would have to agree on the same design, universal design, but that's what he's looking for too. So that's possible. And I have a CO2 laser, and I can make, the face plates. I'm still getting used to it. Sometimes, I struggle with the machine because it's a Chinese one that costs $5,000 or $6,000 as opposed to the American ones that cost $50,000, but it gets the job done. But, he's looking, eventually he's going to need someone to do that. So it's like stuff like that, I'm not pushing it, but it's like, hey, if we could do something together, I could make his face plates for him, because he has no desire. And I make my own cabinets. I don't know if I'm going to continue to, but he has no desire to be a woodworker, so there's all that type of stuff too. And there are companies that make them, and they're pretty reasonably priced considering I know the time it takes to make one, and Tolexing sucks, but I get it done, but you put the money up front there, and it's like, for me, it's like, okay, this takes the time and money wise, it's probably cheaper to buy them, but really, if I take out the time wise, I'm just buying plywood and Tolex,
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at now. But yeah, there might be, something, in that. Never really thought of it that way, but yeah.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, Sloan, Clifton, Brunswick, Custom Audio Mutation, whoever else I'm missing that might be,
Yeah.
I mean, you could even maybe include, I don't know, a Dr. Z in there. I don't know, like what an established guy would feel about, joining something like that. But I mean, hey, it could be like a big thing for the future to do something like that.
Maybe that company in California, maybe it'll be the one out here, the Ohio boutique amp manufacturer. That company in California makes all those different brands. And so I think Soldano owns it or runs it now.
Well, there's Friedman, there's Morgan, there's however many other companies. I think
Wampler pedals, I think, are made there.
Rev, possibly. I don't know.
Mezzabara amps. There's a Bogner, I think, is out of there too. So, yeah.
Damn.
yeah. There's some big names there. So, yeah. But Curran is a dealer for anything they sell. So
he's a dealer? Really?
Yeah, that's why he's got all these amps in his living room. He owns a house in Akron, and used to live there, but that's where his studio and his shop is now, and that's where he goes to work. But he lives in another town now with his wife. But yeah, he has all kinds of stuff, and he has stuff he makes too, and it's helped bring business to what he makes too. So
I've recommended his stuff to influencers, quote unquote, in the YouTube world, and I always push his amps. I always recommend, if you're into high gain, into metal, hard rock, I always recommend his stuff.
And I gladly admit he's a little bit ahead of me, because he's done the 2-channel stuff and he really knows tone because he's a player too, and he can really hear how good they sound because he's a good player. But yeah, he makes good stuff. He makes good stuff. There's some other pedal makers in Ohio. He used to call it Redman, but now they're called Native Pedals. He called it Redman because he's Native American, and it was called Redman, but I think he changed the name to Native Pedals. They're pretty nice pedals. Clifton makes a pedal now, or a couple maybe. Yeah.
I'll check that out. Redman, maybe.
No, actually, I think it's called Native Instruments or Native Pedals.
Wow, that's a cool website.
Yeah, they're nice looking, nice design too, and I think they sound pretty good.
Let's see. There's the builder right there, Mike.
Yeah. Yeah, he's been at a lot of the shows. I haven't seen him lately, but he's been there.
Let's see. Chorus, distortion, delay, fuzz, overdrive, phaser, reverb, tremolo, vibrato.
All the basics.
That's some of the coolest designs I've ever seen on a pedal, actually.
Yeah, it's nice and just simple, but nice. So if you know, what's that?
A war party. That's hilarious.
Yeah, if you notice, I don't want to get too fancy with my designs. I just want basic amp and cleanness, and
that's what I like.
Yeah, well, there's behind it, like, Apple computers, Steve Jobs was like that, and I've read about him, and not that I'm a Steve Jobs, but there's something behind that where it's just kind of simple and clean looking, as opposed, some people want all kinds of stuff going on with their design. I'd rather have it just kind of pretty clean. So
let's just for the hell of it, just check out this custom audio mutation.
Yeah. Oh yeah, look at he's got all these amps on there, the Mesobaros, the Diesels, Friedmans.
So these are Mojo Tone models of Mesobarbaras, Friedmans, and all that?
No, only the Mojo Tone ones. He takes a Plexi or a JCM 800 and he builds it and does mods for Mojo Tone kits. That's just one of the things he does. And it was a good idea. The purpose behind that was because he sees these guys spending $3,000-4,000 on a vintage Marshall, and then they want to bring it to him and spend another $500 or $600 to get it up to spec. And he goes, you're really better off doing this. It's a newer amp. It's a better amp. And so he does that, and he sells them, and he does some nice, cool mods to them too. That's those Mojo kits, but this other stuff there, like, he's got the SLOs, he's got the Mesobaros, the Diesel, the Friedman. And then he's got his own. If you look where it says shop.
Oh yeah, shop. Let's see. Shop. Oh, here we go.
I don't know why the pictures aren't coming through for some of them, but
Mesobarbara, Friedman. Man, it's kind of a bad storm out there right now. Oh, but he actually sells the actual amps too. Huh.
Yeah, he's a dealer. He sells his own plus theirs.
I got to try some of his stuff out. I'd love to, hear one of his plexis. Let's just check out the Mesobarbara just for the hell of it. Oh, he doesn't have a photo.
Actually, I haven't been to his site in a while. I'm kind of looking myself.
Red 7, he might be into Red 7 amps too.
I don't know if I ever heard of them.
Oh, they're on Tone Talk. They started by doing like a really cool clone of a Dynatronics tri-chorus, and then they went into like hot rodded stuff and Mesobarbara, Mesa Boogie, Friedman type things. Let's see what this is. It's 850 single channel 50 watt.
He used to make some 2 channels. He's taken a pause on that. I think he's kind of redoing stuff. He'll tell you all about it though.
Cool. Well, they're gonna kick us off here in like 4 minutes, so
Okay. Well,
um,
let's end it and we'll keep in touch, and I'll put you on my list for sending cool stuff to you. If you want, follow me on Instagram. I don't know if you're on social media, but Instagram and Facebook, I got my own Facebook, my like page, and my personal if you want. Usually I try and put everything up, but like when I get a video like this, I just send it to about 10 different people, when the ones I just sent you today. So
cool. I really appreciate all your help today, and awesome to hear your story and what you're doing. And I will talk to you very soon.
all right, thank you. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Bye.